The Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad as a Valid Exoteric Expression of the Transcendent Unity of Religions. A Call for United Front Ecumenism by Charles Upton. In 2013, I made the acquaintance of Dr. John Andrew Morrow, Ilyas Abd al-Alim Islam, a meeting that, as the saying goes, changed my life. Dr. Morrow is known for his profound, detailed, and groundbreaking researches on the covenants of Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of his time and other peoples of the book. These covenants, a number of which he has either newly discovered or rescued from obscurity, are treaties that the Prophet concluded with various Christian communities of his time. They uniformly forbid all Muslims to attack or rob or damage the buildings of peaceful Christians, or even prevent their Christian wives from attending divine liturgy and taking spiritual direction from their Christian elders, quote, until the coming of the hour, end quote, the end of the world. The bulk of Dr. Morrow's research to date on these documents appears in his seminal book, The Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the World, out on Angelico Sophia Perennis 2013, as well as his 3-volume anthology edited by him and entitled Islam and the People of the Book, Critical Studies of the Covenants of the Prophet, out on Cambridge Scholars 2017. This much-needed scholarship has gone a long way towards resurrecting the prophetic covenants from obscurity and throwing light on the just and equitable norms the Prophet laid down governing how Muslims were to treat peoples of the book and other religious minorities within the growing Islamic State. It has also struck a new chord in interfaith relations, one which is not dependent upon the worldview of secular liberalism, but springs directly from the Abrahamic tradition itself, as well as providing a powerful ideological weapon to delegitimize ISIS and other takfiri terrorist organizations. For those who don't, I'd just like to interject at this point, for those who don't know, takfiri, what that refers to are the Salafist idea that one can unilaterally declare another Muslim to have apostatized from Islam and therefore to deserve the death penalty. Anyway, continuing with Mr. Upton's text. Out of Dr. Morrow's scholarly efforts grew an international Muslim/interfaith peace movement known as the Covenants Initiative, whose goal has been to combat terrorist ideology and protect persecuted Christians, a movement which, as of 2019, became the Covenants of the Prophet Foundation. The initiative, which I initially conceived of, invites Muslims from all walks of life to accept the covenants as legally binding upon them today. It has been signed by many prominent Muslim scholars, including a representative of Al-Azhar University, and has been endorsed by such dignitaries as Ayatollah Khamenei, Supreme Leader of Iran, Pope Francis, and Bartholomew, Ecumenical Patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Islam has a clear doctrine of the nature, goals, and limits of the lesser jihad, the intellectual or social or military struggle to defend religion in the outer world. The Catholic tradition, too, has its equivalent in the doctrine of the just war. In our own time, however, the war to defend religion must be conceived of not only in terms of the defense of particular religions, but of the struggle for survival of religion itself, in view of the mounting evidence supporting the conclusion that the global elites are implementing a long-term agenda to co-opt, control, and or destroy all the traditional religions of the earth. As I see it, the most accurate picture of the proper relationship between the revealed religions, based on the acceptance of the principle that more than one religion based on a divine revelation may be spiritually operative at the same time, is the relatively esoteric doctrine that traditionalist/perennialist Fritjof Schuon, following René Guénon, called the Transcendent Unity of Religions, which forms the conceptual center of what has come to be known as the traditionalist or perennialist school of traditional metaphysics. The Transcendent Unity of Religions accepts all the great world religions as valid spiritual paths based on divine revelations, as indeed the Holy Quran allows Muslims to believe, according to the following passages. Verily, those who believe, and those who are Jews and Christians, and Sabians, whoever believes in God and the last day and does righteous good deeds shall have their reward with their Lord. On them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. 262. He has revealed unto you, Muhammad, the scripture with truth, confirming that which was revealed before it, even as he revealed the Torah and the Gospel. 3:3. Say, O Muhammad, O people of the scripture, come to a word that is just between us and you, that we worship none but God, and that we associate no partners with him, and that none of us shall take others as lords besides God. 364. Say, O Muhammad, we believe in Allah, and that which is revealed unto us, and that which was revealed unto Abraham, and Ishmael, and Isaac, and Jacob, and the tribes, and that which was vouchsafed unto Moses and Jesus, and the prophets from their Lord. We make no distinction between any of them, and unto him we have surrendered. 384. And do not dispute with the followers of the book, except by what is best, except those of them who act unjustly and say, we believe in that which has been revealed to us and revealed to you, and our God and your God is one, and to him do we submit. 29:46. I need to make it clear at this point, however, that I do not consider the Transcendent Unity of Religions to be any kind of Muslim or crypto-Muslim doctrine. If one revelation is given precedence over the others, in line with the interpretation of the Transcendent Unity of Religions apparently held, for example, by Sayyid Hossein Nas, among others, then the essence of that transcendent unity is compromised. Nor do I accept this doctrine as positing any kind of superior religious universalism or quintessential esotericism, Schuon's phrase, that places the Transcendent Unity of Religions on a plane that transcends the divine revelations, a position taken by Patrick Laude in his book Keys to the Beyond, Fritjof Schuon's cross-traditional language of transcendence. To believe this is to reject any kind of traditionalism in favor of the sort of perennialism presently sponsored by the globalist elites, which forms an important part of their agenda to undermine, control, and possibly even liquidate the traditional religions of the earth. Now, I'd like just to interject at this point, as I've said elsewhere, just because I'm including these readings as part of my perennialist pre-theory series, doesn't mean that I endorse everything that's included in any given paper. And this last paragraph I take quite a bit of umbrage with, but setting that aside, let's continue with the text. But does the inner, more or less esoteric doctrine of the Transcendent Unity of Religions, when it is accepted as in no way specifically Islamic in nature, also have an outer or exoteric expression that is proper to it? Is it a theoria capable of generating a valid social praxis? In my view, the answer is yes. The reason I can say this is because I have watched the Covenant Initiative, over the course of its development, begin to define a true outward expression and context for interfaith action that is entirely in line with the Transcendent Unity of Religions. Certainly, the Covenant's initiative is nothing if not an Islamic manifestation, one that demonstrates that the Islam of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, exhibited a more explicit interfaith orientation than any other revealed religion, except perhaps the archaic Hinduism that could legitimately synthesize the indigenous religions of the Indian subcontinent with the Vedic religion of the Aryan invaders. And again, I'd interject, maybe more like Aryan waves of immigration rather than invasion, and also I think I would hope that the listener is aware of this, But the term Aryan here doesn't indicate any kind of sympathy with National Socialist ideas. It's a term that, unfortunately, because of its association with National Socialism, has been replaced in scholarship by Indo-European. So we could say the Vedic religion of the Indo-European migrants, but that's a quibble. Anyway, continuing with Mr. Upton's text. Nonetheless, the Covenant's initiative claims no intrinsic superiority as a Muslim movement over any compatible ecumenical effort that might emerge from another traditional faith, nor has it always been useful to explicitly present the initiative as a direct manifestation of the transcendent unity of religions, since the term is meaningful only to those who understand and accept the traditionalist/perennialist perspective. On an official level, the Covenant's initiative is not a perennialist movement. Our founder, Dr. John Andrew Morrow, does not particularly identify as a perennialist. Nonetheless, if it had not been for my own prior understanding of the Transcendent Unity of Religions, according to the specific interpretation of it which rejects both its identification as a strictly Muslim manifestation and its characterization as a higher doctrine that transcends the confessional faiths, I would never have recognized the prophetic covenants as capable of generating an international peace movement that treats all the traditional religions as distinct and equally valid divine revelations, and which can therefore envision a true alliance between them for mutual protection against the anti-traditional and counter-traditional forces of the secular world. If the unity of religions is truly transcendent, if the paths of the revealed faiths and the perennial wisdom traditions only finally meet at the center from which they all have emanated, that is, only in God, then any form of interfaith dialogue or secular ecumenism that tends towards a homogenizing of doctrine, that places the discernment of common ground between the faiths, certainly a valid ground to define as long as the strict limits of orthodoxy are preserved, above a recognition of the providential differences between them, is disallowed from the outset. Each divine revelation is an incomparable expression of the unique. But if this is true, is there any way that the faiths can legitimately express their solidarity? Must their intercourse be limited to a simple, factual understanding of each other's doctrines based on an agreement to disagree, coupled with a tolerant willingness to simply let each other alone? Since the Transcendent Unity of Religions, though it discerns certain metaphysical principles common to all faith, resists any horizontal doctrinal unification, reserving full unity for the day when all the paths return to their origin in the one God, it is necessarily opposed to syncretism. Consequently, it sees all hopes and plans for world unity based on a one-world religion as both unrealistic in practical terms and either dangerously naive or spiritually subversive in conceptual terms. In my book, The System of the Antichrist, Truth and Falsehood in Postmodernism and the New Age, Sophia Perennis, 2001, I called for a United Front Ecumenism, according to which the world religions, putting aside various increasingly barren attempts to define a doctrinal common ground, while agreeing to disagree, or as Dr. James Cutzinger phrases it, disagreeing to agree, would come together to defend themselves and each other from the forces of false religion and militant secularism that now threaten to destroy them all. I thought I would never have a chance to see such a movement in action until, in 2013, I realized that the Covenant's initiative was a perfect example of the United Front Ecumenism I had called for in 2001, and that it was in fact a legitimate outer expression of the Transcendent Unity of Religions in a way that most liberal ecumenical and interfaith initiatives, with their syncretistic tendencies and their poorly understood, though not entirely clandestine sponsorship of the globalist elites, never could be. Shaitan hates all the revealed religions because he recognizes them as emanating a single divine source, this source being the prime object of his loathing. Thus, the darkness of this world, by that very hatred, testifies to the truth of the transcendent unity of religions, and challenges the religions to unite to oppose it. In light of this principle, we can begin to see how traditional metaphysics and eschatology could conceivably generate a viable socio-political praxis on their own, independent of any liberal, libertarian, fascist, Marxist, militant religious exclusivist, Islamicist, or globalist ideology, or any permutation or combination thereof. The theoretical foundations of this praxis would include the recognition of certain eternal metaphysical principles, the vision of history as the working out of these principles in the dimension of time, largely within the context of a set of unique divine revelations, to the degree that a person recognizes and understands such principles and works to actualize them according to the norms of one of these revelations, he or she is in the world but not of it, and consequently is not hampered by an unconscious identification with the realm of relative and ever-changing conditions. Only someone who is not identified with the conditional world, and therefore free of all partiality, can see the world as it really is. The sort of transcendental objectivity would allow the one who has achieved it to hear and obey the will of God in all his or her dealings with this world, and consequently to formulate strategic initiatives that take into account the entire situation he or she confronts, rather than simply reacting to a limited view of that situation based on belief, obsession, or ideology. One of the historical ancestors of this kind of metaphysically based social action is the praxis of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, as expressed in his prophetic covenants, which Muhammad tells us were inspired by Allah himself. As we have already seen, these covenants, as well as the famous Constitution of Medina, comprise the treaties that Muhammad concluded with Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and others. And one of their most striking aspects is that they exhibit a nearly seamless union between theocracy and democracy. They are announced and written in the name of Allah and claim divine inspiration as their origin. Likewise, they posit the Prophet Muhammad and his legitimate successors as the ultimate authority. On the other hand, they contain God-given laws and norms that even the Prophet had no authority to change or revoke, including what is perhaps the first universal declaration of human rights in human history, written down more than a full millennium before what we, looking back to the French and American revolutions, might consider to be its time. The rights of women and minorities are clearly spelled out. The socio-political implications of the Quranic principle of no compulsion in religion, 256, are fully expressed and defined. The reappearance of the prophetic covenants in this darkest hour of human history is nothing short of providential. There is no denying that we live in apocalyptic times, which certainly does not mean that we must now seize the apocalypse and turn it to our own ends. Such a course of action would be both impossible to accomplish and fatal to attempt. In the terminology of the Book of Revelations and the Holy Quran, a third world war, for example, between polarized human collectives such as the United States, the European Union, Russia, or China, would be the final expression of the barren, titanic struggle between the biblical Gog and Magog and the Quranic Yajuj and Majuj, and would consequently spell the end of the human race. The war between the worldly forces represented by these two titans, a war which we are presently immersed in on many levels, is nothing less than the satanic counterfeit of the true eschatological conflict between the Prophet Jesus and Al-Dajjal, the Antichrist, which figures so prominently in the eschatological hadith literature of Islam, and that between the word of God, called faithful and true, the rider on the white horse, and the armies of the beast in the 19th chapter of the Apocalypse. This falsely conceived imitation of the ultimate eschatological conflict is the archetypal source of the many ideological imperatives we are confronted with today. Hotly defended intellectual, cultural, and political positions that may seem like true alternatives, but which in reality are all working together to separate humanity from the common vision of our Creator. It's the devil who draws the sides in our time. And, as Rama Kumaraswamy liked to say, the son of the co-founder of the traditionalist school, Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, quote, "The devil doesn't care which side of the horse you fall off of," end quote. Satan labors to falsely define the various worldly positions we are induced to adopt, and by so doing makes sure that any stance we take will be essentially skewed, and will therefore lead, by the path of self-contradiction, to our ultimate destruction. Only those who have died to this world can know God's true will for the earth and obey it. Only they can tell the difference between the true and false wars. The reappearance of the prophetic covenants this late in the day, in this darkest of times, is truly mysterious. If adopted by Islamic authorities in the context of present-day conditions, they would present nothing less than a blueprint for the fundamental renewal of Islam after the ravages of colonialism, the fall of the Caliphate and its successor, the Ottoman Sultanate, and the depredations of the Takfiri terrorists and their Western sponsors. In addition, to turn aside for a moment into the more arcane reaches of esoteric historical research, it is even possible that they relate to René Guénon's belief that the Knights Templar, though these holy warriors may later have descended into worldliness and corruption, were in touch at one point with representatives of the primordial tradition in Jerusalem, and consequently must have recognized and practiced some form of the Transcendent Unity of Religions. In Dr. John Andrew Morrow's chapter, The Covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the Armenian Christians of Jerusalem, which appears in Islam and the People of the Book, Critical Studies in the Covenants of the Prophet, he quotes French researcher Bernard Falque de Bezor as follows: "These firmans, covenants of the Prophet, would become a hadith in the Muslim corpus known as the Sunnah, and would later be transcribed in the houses of wisdom in Baghdad and Damascus. They later passed into the hands of the Umayyad, Abbasid, and Fatimid caliphs. These are also the documents that were given in the 11th century by Michael, Monophysite, Bishop and Patriarch of Antioch, that is, by Michael the Syrian, death 1199 Common Era, the Armenian Patriarch of Antioch, who was in office from 1166 to 1199 Common Era, to the dynasty of the Armenian kings, the Rupanids, and to Mleh, I apologize if I mispronounce that, Prince of Armenia, roughly 1170 to 1175 CE, the master of the Templars of Armenia, in particular at the same moment that the Alawi Ashashin Nusayri, again I apologize for my mangled pronunciation, documents entered the chain of Armanus in Sicily. These latter documents concern the mysteries of illumination of the ancient Christian and Jewish prophets, as well as Muhammad. They represent the foundation and the basis of the secret spiritual meditations that were given by Hugues de Payne, the ordained priest of the Saint Sepulchre, to the 31 Proto-Templars cited in the Armenian chronicle of the aforementioned Michael the Syrian. Dr. Morrow goes on to say, Bernard Falk de Bezor advances another astonishing and audacious theory, namely that the secrets granted and jealously guarded, protected, and transmitted by the Knights Templar and other secretive Christian societies consisted of the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad. Since the Dome of the Rock, occupied by the Templars during the Crusades, contains some of the most ancient examples of early Arabic and Islamic writing, it is also likely that the complex contained precious documents from the dawn of Islam, including, apparently, copies of the Mohammedan covenants. If true, this would certainly go a long way towards corroborating Guénon's belief that the Templars were in some sense the guardians of the primordial tradition, earlier exponents of one version of the Transcendent Unity of Religions. According to the Islamic tradition, a renewer of the religion is destined to appear at the head of every country, and certainly the covenants of the Prophet continue to spread widely through the Muslim world, often eliciting a heartwarming and enthusiastic response. However, from the practical, worldly point of view of culture analysis and realpolitik, the prospects for a total renewal of Islam at this late date, for nothing less is required, do not look very promising. All the traditional religious collectives are in a state of retreat due to the degeneration of the cosmic environment, discerned and predicted by René Guénon for the latter days of the cycle, and the Islamic Ummah is no exception. Nonetheless, we must always remember that things that are difficult or impossible for us are easy for God. If He wills a renewal of Islam at this late date, then it will come to pass. However, two other possible goals, one moral and the other eschatological, may be discerned for God's clear command that the prophetic covenants reappear in our time. The first would be to give individual Muslims a chance to repent of the hatred of the other God-given religions that has been instilled in them by the kind of corrupt and treacherous religious scholars that the Hadith literature warns us against. The second would be to prepare a remnant from Islam, not necessarily limited to the Shia, to actively await the coming of the Mahdi, who will establish justice and true religion, and the Prophet Jesus, who will slay Al-Dajjal, the deceiver, the Antichrist. Some Christians have been understandably suspicious of our rediscovery of the covenants of the Prophet. It seems to them as if these documents might represent a covert attempt to reintroduce the notion of an Islamic empire under which Christians would be relegated to dhimmi, protected minority, status once again. Our position, however, is that the covenants possess a relevance and a force of law that transcends dhimmitude, since the Prophet declared them to be in force and incumbent upon all Muslims until the coming of the hour, not simply until the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the last Muslim political entity which took the covenants as the basis of official policy toward non-Muslim religious minorities. And it is clear that the covenants of the Prophet incarnate Muhammad's great love and respect for the peoples of the book, Christians in particular, which is entirely in line with the teachings of the Noble Quran. On the basis of these documents, we of the Covenants Initiative, as Muslims, have offered the following pledge to Christians. We, the undersigned, hold ourselves bound by the spirit and the letter of the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, with the Christians of the world, in the understanding that these covenants, if accepted as genuine, have the force of law in the Sharia today, and that nothing in the Sharia, as traditionally and correctly interpreted, has ever contradicted them. As fellow victims of the terror and godlessness, the spirit of militant secularism and false religiosity now abroad in the world, we understand your suffering as Christians through our suffering as Muslims, and gain greater insight into our own suffering through the contemplation of your suffering. May the most merciful of the merciful regard the sufferings of the righteous and the innocent. May he strengthen us in full submission to his will, to follow the spirit and the letter of the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the world in all our dealings with them. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Praise be to Allah, the cherisher and sustainer of the worlds. This pledge, which forms the heart of the Covenant Initiative, has been signed by many Muslim scholars and religious leaders from around the world. We believe that the initiative, as well as our ongoing scholarship related to the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, which continues to bring new ancient documents to light, can serve to powerfully validate and support such allied initiatives as the Amman message issued by the Kingdom of Jordan in 2004, as well as the collective fatwa of the International Conference on Who Are the Al-Sunnah, promulgated in Grozny, Chechnya in August 2016, and the Fatwa on Dangerous Sects of the Council of Muftis of Russia, issued at the same time, both of which make it abundantly clear that the Salafi Takfiris, such as Daesh, the so-called Islamic State, otherwise known as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and other similar extremist organizations, are firmly outside the Islamic fold. An unbiased study of the prophetic covenants, as well as the Constitution of Medina, should make it clear that it was the intent of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, to found a federation of the peoples of the book as an act of United Front Ecumenism for mutual defense against that federation's common enemies, the Byzantine Empire, insofar as it attacked Islam and oppressed various marginalized Christian communities, the Persian Empire, and the pagan Quraysh of Mecca. As in the Prophet's time, so in ours, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as well as Hinduism, Buddhism, and other traditional religions, are presently under attack from many directions: cultural, ideological, socio-political, terroristic, and military. It is certainly common knowledge that these attacks are taking place, but do we know exactly who is behind them in every case? We assume, correctly, that some of them are based on hereditary feuds between the traditional faiths, that others are the result of anti-religious policies by governments like that of Communist China, and that still others are the work of lone gunmen. But do we actually have a theoretical basis for these assumptions that is backed by a sound body of research? For example, assuming that we are willing to admit that some attacks on churches in the West are carried out by Satanists, are we willing and able to investigate exactly who these so-called Satanists might be, their ideological histories, their sources of funding? And what about the possibility that some attacks against houses of worship are really false flags designed to turn one religion against another, possibly under the ultimate sponsorship of the globalist elites? Do we ever even ask if this might be so, much less carry on serious research on this possibility? When the Covenant Initiative made its debut at the Bilal Mosque in Lexington, Kentucky in 2013, I expressed my belief that forces exist in the world today who are actively attempting to foment conflict between the religions in order to weaken them. In response, a Muslim from the Indian subcontinent told the story of those nights in his native city when pig carcasses were thrown into mosques, slaughtered cows dragged into Hindu temples, predictably resulting in Hindu-Muslim riots the next day. Needless to say, it was quite obvious to him that such actions were not planned for the same night by Hindus and Muslims working in unison, but were perpetrated by unknown third parties. This and many other indications suggest to me that the likely meta-strategy of the global elites is to co-opt and neutralize all the religions. After all, why should an elite cadre of oligarchs, backed by global finance, who aspire to world domination, sit back and do nothing when the beliefs and aspirations and moral standards of billions of people are determined by, quote, outmoded religious institutions that these oligarchs do not control? Evidence exists that the globalist elites are now subjecting the traditional religions of the earth to a two-pronged attack. On the one hand, they are sponsoring a global interfaith movement that subtly pressures the faiths to de-emphasize any divisive doctrines in the name of interfaith friendship, even if these doctrines are foundational to the faiths in question, thereby weakening their doctrinal and moral fabric. On the other hand, by both military action and false flag terror operations, they are turning the faiths against each other and so setting them up for mutual destruction. A Muslim leader who wishes to remain anonymous reported to us that, at a meeting at the Obama White House in 2016, a delegation of Muslim leaders was told the following by the National Security Advisor: ISIS is now losing territory in Syria and Iraq. Therefore, ISIS fighters will be coming home to the United States. Muslim leaders, we want your help in reintegrating these fighters into US society, for which federal grants are available. On hearing this, the Muslim leader in question said to himself, doesn't this woman realize that ISIS has a hit list of US Muslim leaders, some of whom are in this room right now? It is clear from this and many other indications that the US government has been running terrorist mercenaries under the banner of al-Nusra, the Free Syrian Army, and ISIS in Syria and Iraq, just as it trained and armed the Salvadorian death squads in the 1980s. I would interject that I don't think that's clear at all from that statement. I'd quite strongly disagree with much of what Mr. Upton is saying here, but for the sake of completeness, let's continue. So continuing. Given that no actual record, as far as we know, of that White House meeting exists, we began scouring the web for evidence of a government plan to reintegrate ISIS fighters into US society. Our findings appear in Dr. John Andrew Morrow's article, Welcome Home ISIS, the Obama administration's plan to reintegrate foreign terrorist fighters. And there's a link to that. A lesson drawn from my own experience may further illustrate this two-pronged strategy. At the very same time that the US Obama administration was providing funding, training and logistical support to terrorist organizations such as al-Nusra and the Free Syrian Army, as well as elements of ISIS, in an attempt to bring down the Assad regime and menace Iran, organizations that have massacred countless Christians, Yazidis, Sufis, Shiites, and traditional Sunni Muslims, the Christian-Muslim dialogue in my hometown of Lexington, Kentucky, was hosting speakers from the FBI, the Federal Attorney's Office, Homeland Security, and the State Department, all preaching the eternal virtues of interfaith friendship. In any case, we are all well aware of how the growing number of attacks on churches, mosques, and synagogues around the world, including North America. In view of the uncertain origin of these attacks and the possibility that at least some of them are being carried out by forces dedicated to subverting all the traditional faiths, I believe that a vigorous response based on United Front Ecumenism is clearly called for. The virtue of this kind of ecumenism, as opposed to the more familiar form of liberal ecumenism, is that it leaves the foundational doctrines of the different religions intact, concentrating instead on the practical work of mutual defense against common enemies. And the metaphysical implication here is that because the forces inimical to religion, whether or not they are working together on a given occasion, all recognize a common threat to their various agendas in the traditional religions of the earth, these religions must possess a mysterious unity of standpoint that transcends their obvious doctrinal differences. In other words, rather than attempting to establish a conceptual unity of religions, United Front Ecumenism posits their existential unity on a plane transcending them. It is precisely this that makes this kind of ecumenism a proper outward expression of the transcendent unity of religions. Nonetheless, whether or not the doctrine of the transcendent unity of religions ultimately forms part of a comprehensive theoretical response to the spectrum of anti-religious attacks we are seeing today, we believe that the religions should begin, with all deliberate speed, to develop plans for the establishment of a United Front Ecumenism for mutual aid and defense, while at the same time intensively investigating the possibility that outside forces might be acting to infiltrate religious organizations, co-opt them, and turn them against each other. The established interfaith movement, heavily sponsored by the globalist elites, see False Dawn, The United Religions Initiative, Globalism, and the Quest for a One World Religion by Lee Penn, operates according to the paradigm that religions should dialogue with each other, not one that directs them to investigate the motives and funding sources of those non-religious entities, national governments, extra-governmental foundations and think tanks, etc., who often support such dialogue. Likewise, today's interfaith world does not seem overly willing to expend much time or energy in determining whether the various groups who espouse anti-religious ideologies in today's world might actually be practicing what they preach by secretly mounting physical attacks against the faiths they so openly despise. In this age of anti-religious violence, due diligence in these areas is obviously called for, especially in view of the fact that the tactic of creating conflict between religions in order to control populations has a long and well-documented history. Joachim Hagopian, sorry, I'm mispronouncing that name, in Divide and Conquer: The Globalist Pathway to New World Order Tyranny, speaks of the retention of power by utilizing a deliberate strategy of causing those in subordinate positions to engage in conflicts with each other that weaken and keep them from any unified effort to remove the status quo force from power. This divide and conquer stratagem was frequently repeated by European colonial powers, typically pitting competitive tribal, ethnic, and religious factions against each other to ensure they would not conspire to revolt against the ruling imperialists. In Asia, the British took full advantage of Muslims versus Hindus in India, as well as creating conflict between Indians and Pakistanis. If such tactics are indeed being practiced on a global scale, with the goal of reducing nearly the entire population of the Earth to quasi-colonial status, the doctrine of the Transcendent Unity of Religions could function the guiding principle around which a true United Front Ecumenism to oppose the universal recolonization might develop. That sentence didn't make an awful lot of sense to me. Anyway, such an ecumenism would only succeed, however, if the unity were understood as truly transcendent, not as worldly, doctrinal, or political unification of the religions on the horizontal plane to establish some version of a one-world religion, an ecclesia that would inevitably fall into the hands of the globalist elites if it was not in fact established by them in the first place. This, unfortunately, is one of the more common misunderstandings of the transcendent unity of religions, an inversion of meaning that is likely being promoted according to the principle of corruptio optimi pessima, the corruption of the best is the worst, by the globalist elites themselves. However, if the principle of the metaphysical relationship of the many and the one is firmly grasped, according to which the manifestation of the transcendent one in the relative world is necessarily multiple, since this is the nature of the relativity itself, the clear implication being that the enforced unification of the many is impossible, since the one is truly transcendent and also unnecessary, since the one is immanent in all things, then the transcendent unity of religions, God willing, could become the pole star around which the constellation of God's several divine self-revelations to humanity for this cycle of manifestation might continue to turn, shedding their saving light on the human race until the consummation of the age. Those groups or individuals who wish to know more about the Covenants Initiative, the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, and how these covenants might be used in an interfaith setting to further United Front Ecumenism may be interested in taking the self-administered Covenants of the Prophet training course, available at covenantsoftheprophet.org/the Covenants training, the Covenants course. I'll include that link in the description. If you value my work, I'd be most grateful if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video with anyone you think might be interested. If you would like to support me in working on this project, I'd be deeply thankful if you would consider becoming a regular supporter through Patreon or making a one-time donation through Ko-fi, links in the description. If you do subscribe, please remember to hit that little bell icon, because otherwise YouTube won't inform you when I upload new videos. If you'd prefer to read my essays over the video format, they are all available in written form on Substack. Link also in the description.